Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. For those of you that are new here, my name's Kate and every Friday I bring you a book review. So today's book review is the Other Bennet Sister by Janice Hadlow, and it deals with Mary Bennet from Pride and Prejudice. So I'm going to assume that you have all either read Pride and Prejudice, you've watched Pride and Prejudice, you know the events of Pride and Prejudice, you know who I'm talking about when I say Lizzie or Jane or Mr. Collins or Charlotte Lucas. I have a couple of gripes with this book, and my main one is that it is way too long. It's a beast. I mean, look at it, look at this thing, it's a beast. I've got the Game of Thrones books behind me, or the Ice and Fire books behind me, and those are long old books, and this book, I think it's thicker than those books. And I mean, oh my god, it could just do with being 200 pages shorter. It's 600 pages, just over 600 pages, and it could do with being about 400 pages. It's just 200 pages too long. I don't know what the editor was thinking, because towards the end it really starts to drag. It just drags so much. I skipped to the end and just read, and yeah, I probably didn't read the last 200 pages because I just couldn't. Now I knew what the ending was, and that it was the ending I thought. I didn't need to read anymore. I was done with it. Like, I really tried to force myself to read anymore, but I could not. It was too long and too draggy and too dull by the end. It's like, it's almost a bit like La La Land. Like, I absolutely love La La Land, but the pace is too slow in it. It needs to speed up a bit, whereas The Greatest Showman is like a sprint, whereas La La Land is a marathon. We need something in between. And The Other Bennet Sister, it's a cross-country race. It's one of those awful cross-country races that you had to do at school that felt like it would never end. And you were just running around in circles and circles and circles, going round and round this field, thinking it would never end. It's one of those books. Which is such a shame, because it started off so well, and when I saw it in the shop, it was in my local supermarket, and I was so excited. I was like, yes, finally! It's about time Mary Bennet got some love. But then it just dragged so much. Oh, it just dragged so much. Whoever the editor was on this, like, they seriously need a course in, they need to learn how to edit a book. They need to learn how to do their job, because it dragged so much. Enough about how much it dragged. I've literally spent the first half of this video just talking about how much it drags. I'm going to talk about the book now. So it is nice to see Mary getting a little bit of love, and as the middle sister in the Bennet clan, like, I always felt a bit sad for her, because in Pride and Prejudice, Lydia and Kitty and Jane and Lizzie are very much kind of twosomes, and they're very close, and it's kind of Mary in the middle on her own. And this book does cover her life before, Mary's life before the events in Pride and Prejudice a little bit, the events during Pride and Prejudice, and then events after Pride and Prejudice a little bit. So it's quite nice, I felt, to see the events that happened in Pride and Prejudice from Mary's point of view, from the Bennets that are kind of back at Longbourn, getting on with everyday life, basically. I felt that was quite nice. That was quite interesting to see it from Mary's point of view. And because obviously we go with Lizzie and to Netherfield, we go with her to Pemberley, to Lady Catherine de Bourgh, to the Collinses. We go with her on all these trips, whereas Mary doesn't. So they're just almost a footnote in Mary's story. And she's as shocked as anyone when Lizzie suddenly gets engaged to Mr. Darcy. And I thought it was really interesting that the way that Mary was portrayed when Mr. Collins comes to stay at Longbourn, that I thought was done really well, because Mary seems to be the most kind of understanding of Mr. Collins and tries to sort of, I guess, put herself in his shoes a bit, whereas Lizzie is like her father and a bit mocking of him, whereas Lydia and Kitty just avoid him at all costs, and Jane very sweet and very polite, whereas Mary, you know, tries to engage with him. But I thought that was really interesting, and I do think that this book shines another light on Mr. Collins, and it's not such the unflattering light that is bestowed upon him in Pride and Prejudice. And yes, he's very much written the same as he is in Pride and Prejudice, you know, apologising a lot, a bit of a fool. But through Mary's eyes, we see him in a completely different light. And it's a much more flattering light, I would say. She really kind of understands that there's probably a little bit of an insecurity in there. He's just trying really hard to impress everyone. And, yeah, she's just a bit kinder to him than the rest of the Bennets are. So I think that was nice. It was nice to see that from Mary's point of view. The stuff at the Netherfield Ball was interesting as well from Mary's point of view. And the two in Meryton. I suppose we learn about what it's like for her to be that middle sister in the Bennet family, the one who's kind of overlooked by her mother and by her father because she's almost a plain Jane. And she kind of is her own worst enemy. And this is what I also found quite frustrating about the book, is that to begin with, I just want her to change her thinking of herself. She's almost taken everything that Mrs. Bennet has ever said to her to heart. And I don't know if that's her character or if that's how she's been written in this book. I don't know. I can't decide if that's how Jane Austen had pictured her or how this book has reimagined her. I can't decide what I think on that, but she seems to be her own worst enemy, and it's only when she's around people like Mrs. Hill, the housekeeper, and she ends up with the gardeners at one point in London in this book, who really encourage Lizzie. They really encourage Jane as well. When we see that Lizzie and Jane are with them in Pride and Prejudice, they're, you know, nice. There's not the edge that Mrs. Bennet has. It's only when she's with them that she can kind of see herself in a different point of view, which I do get, because that is kind of nature versus nurture. And when people are saying nice things about you, stick, and you do start to see yourself in a different way. But I feel like she is as close to any sister as she is to Lizzie. And Lizzie is never mean to her in Pride and Prejudice or this book. Lizzie's always very encouraging, she's always very nice, she's always very understanding of Mary and Mary's sensibility and her personality. So I wonder why she didn't listen to Lizzie as the person she looked up to and respected the most. We kind of see Lizzie in this book as the person that she loves the most, which I did, thinking about it after reading this book, I did kind of pick up on that sense in Pride and Prejudice as well. But yeah, she's her own worst enemy for a lot of the book, and so it's quite hard going, it's quite hard to read when you're reading about someone who is so hard on themselves and so convinced they're a certain way and so happy to let other people kind of steal their shine, as it were. It's only when we get into part 2 of the book, after the events of Pride and Prejudice, so it's 2 years after the events of Pride and Prejudice, so Lizzie and Jane are married and Kitty is married by this point. Lizzie is also married, as we know, so it's left Mary as the only unmarried one, so she's at home with her parents at Longbourn, which I would have thought would have been quite nice for her. Like, if I was writing this, I would have had her and Mr. Bennet really forge a relationship then, because he doesn't have Lizzie around anymore. As soon as Lizzie went, I would have thought that he would have seen Mary kind of in the light that he always should have done, without the distraction of Lizzie there, who we all know is Mr. Bennet's favourite. But I don't know, that's just me, that's just my take on it. You might think completely different, have picked up something completely different from Pride and Prejudice. This book has definitely made me think about Mary a lot more, in terms of the character in Pride and Prejudice as well, and how she's written in this. And while I think that, you know, the author has done her best to try and really match up Mary with the Mary in Pride and Prejudice, I think there's some areas where I don't know if the Mary she's writing about is the true Mary that Jane Austen originally came up with. I question that. But again, that is just my take on it. I've had a little look on Goodreads with this book, and a lot of people have absolutely loved it, and not many are complaining about the length. But it does have a happy ending for Mary, which I'm really pleased about. I've really wanted that for her. And I love that. And I love that we also get another look at the rest of the Bennet sisters in this, Jane and Lizzie in particular, which is quite nice. And hearing about the whole Lydia Wickham scandal from Mary's point of view is interesting as well. But yeah, for the majority of the book, I'm just like, oh my god, Mary, just get out of your own way. If you could just get out of your own way, you would see that things aren't quite as bad as you think they are. She does in the second half of this book, but it's almost a bit rom-commy, the second half of this book. Or not rom-commy, maybe more kind of like teen movie where she has a bit of a makeover. But it's not really a makeover, she's just with people who are kind of encouraging her to come out of her shell a bit and, you know, make the best of herself rather than just, I don't know, kind of stick to her plain Jane that she always thought she was. Now she's out of the shadow of her sisters. So I get that from that point of view as well. So yes, long story short, or long rambly video short, I did really enjoy this book, and I definitely would recommend it. And if you can get past the last 200 pages, then you're better than I am. It was nice to see something about Mary from Mary's perspective, and it was nice to see Mary getting a little bit of love. I do think that Mary is definitely the overlooked sister. I would have liked to have seen in that, as I said, in that time when it's just her at Longbourn and all her sisters are married, her and Mr. Bennet build up more of a relationship, because I really think that's something that could have happened, but I didn't write it. That's not how the author saw it going. So all in all, good book, but very long, and the pace needs to be a bit quicker, is my cut to the chase.